Good morning, good morning. All right. We're going to continue on with LDS stories of faith and courage. I think we're on about chapter 9 or so at this point, chapter 10, something like that. And here we go. A Stolen Woman by Florence R. Hill. This is a true story of a tragic event that took place in the lives of two Mormon immigrants from Denmark. It was originally published in 1915. There is an interesting old gentleman living here in Wellington whose life story has a thrill in it. And is reminiscent of the days of the roving Sioux and the howling wilderness of the Pioneer Trail. He is simple, almost childlike in his submission to the sorrow that has been his portion, unwavering in his devotion to a gospel that many might feel had failed him in his need, but which to him has been a solace and a stay. His hoary head and bending shoulders, the sadness that always seems to lurk in his mild blue eyes, and yet well with unfailing tears when memory stirs the past, all speak the burden that years and poverty and sorrow have placed upon him. He is Franz C. Grundtvig. In 1860 he was baptized in Copenhagen, Denmark, his native land. He was soon after sent on a mission, the first year being spent in Denmark, and the balance of the time in Norway. His wife, Jessiane, and their son, Sverren, remained in Denmark until the early spring of 1865, when he was released. She joined him in Christiania for the purpose of emigrating to the Zion he had been proclaiming and she had been dreaming of, while she filled what is so often the woman's part of the mission, that of caring for the home and baby, and sustaining not only by faith and prayer, but with means the loved one doing the active mission work. That's rough, right? Way different then, right? Here we send our young men who are just old enough to be out of the home, but still young enough to not have to worry about wife and child trying to support themselves and the missionary. And yet, so many members of the church carried on. All right. Home, traditions, relatives, and friends were left, and they embarked for America. On board ship, and an epidemic of measles broke out and proved fatal to some 30 children who were buried in the dark yet unresisting ocean. Little Sverren, now 7 years old, had been spared, but the anxiety and fear his parents had experienced were an ill beginning for their journey to Salt Lake. The trip to the Missouri River was uneventful, except such as is always incident to a strange country. They formed part of a company at the Missouri River who were expecting to start overland at once. There were no outfits from Utah, and it became necessary for the agent to buy up oxen and wagons. He encountered unusual difficulty in doing so. The weary days of waiting lengthened into weeks. The camp was unhealthful, and nearly every day some homesick, heartsick, weary saint was led by the angel of death from the scenes unfamiliar and dreary to a better land, requiring neither oxen team nor wagon to traverse. The company was told that each person could carry overland only 50 pounds of baggage. This meant parting with the bulkier portion of what each had deemed necessary for comfort when leaving the home shores. For almost nothing they sold their feather beds and surplus clothing to settlers who had learned that occasions such as this were opportune time for bargainers. This accomplished, all hoped to start, but again they were detained by unexpected delays. Finally, Captain Atwood announced that each person must buy his own provisions. $50 was Brother Grundtvig's share for his family. Then, how all regretted the hasty disposal of their stuff, for in their eagerness to go on, many had given away their things or let them go at ridiculously low figure. Had they waited, they might have traded to better advantage. To raise money for food was certainly a problem. Brother Grundtvig sold his watch and his overcoat. His wife parted with her earrings, her bracelets, yes, Even the wedding ring was tearfully removed and added to the sacrificial pile. Just at this time, he was offered an excellent position at his trade for a year at St. Joseph. It seemed as if it would be to their financial interest to accept. The spirit of gathering, however, was upon them, and moreover, it was against counsel for immigrants to remain in the States. So they continued preparation for their journey to the West. And finally, after 5 weeks of waiting, the saints were told, "Tomorrow we start." Tomorrow we start. Can you not see them? Saints from foreign shores, scanning the level stretch of wilderness before them, eager to press on to the place where the saints of the Lord were building their homes, yet fearful of the dangers on the road. What could that sun sinking behind the western horizon, in a wealth of opulence and burnished copper, tell that little company? In the flushes of its afterglow, was there a prophecy of happiness? What of the road, ye sun god, wrapped in your mantle of gold and silver and iridescent gleams? The glow only faded into softer shadows of night, and in its mystery held the suspense of the trail. Captain Atwood gathered his company together on the morrow. He had about 60 wagons, each drawn by 4 yokes of oxen, and with 18 or 19 people to a wagon. They followed the Platte, lumbering along over dusty roads and through wild wooded country, under the hot summer sun. It was deemed wise for all those who were able to walk to do so as much as possible. How tempting the sylvan retreats of colorful flowers and the strange red sandstone hills! Yet one must not turn from the road, nor from the watchful savage for the watchful savage might be lurking near. The company reached Laramie, where they camped September 20th, 1865. 2 days later, the tragedy of the journey occurred. Brother and Sister Grundvig were walking as usual, while Sverrin remained with the wagon. They had walked quite a way, and Sister Grundvig was tired. She was not strong, and the hardships of the trail weighed upon her, despite the buoyancy of youth and the staff of faith. They paused to rest, then slowly wended their way forward. The company had continued on. They were in hilly country, and the walking grew more difficult. They were 1.5 miles behind, but it was time to camp for noon, and they were confident they could catch up with the others when the stop was made. Suddenly a shot was heard. A ridge between them and the wagons, with fast-beating, fearful hearts, they hastened their steps. The company on ahead had stopped for noon, and the oxen were taken to water by the boys. There, Sioux Indians attacked the lads with the idea of stealing the cattle. 5 boys were wounded. The men rushed from camp with their guns, and the Sioux were driven off. Reaching the top of the ridge at this moment, the belated ones saw this desperation and met some of the Indians. With a yell, the savages rode upon them. 2 snatched the trembling woman, Sister Grundvig, and passed her to another, who laid her fainting across his horse. They then rode away, shooting at Brother Grundvig and yelling as they went, all but one. This savage followed up the man who was hurrying toward the camp, shooting at him. Several arrows struck him, and his progress was very slow. The Indian continued following the shooting, and finally he drew near camp, pierced him with an arrow in the left hip. The wounded man fell as if dead, and his tormentor rode away. The company had witnessed the tragedy on the ridge. It was all Captain Atwood could do to restrain the men from rushing to the rescue. He forbade them doing so, as it was uncertain where the Indians were concealed. Besides, there were only 2 horses in the company, and they were nearly exhausted, so that pursuit was hazardous. The telegraph was established at this time, and, coming to a station, word was sent to Salt Lake City. President Young communicated with Fort Laramie, and the soldiers scoured the country, but found no trace of the Indian or their prisoner. Wounded and heartbroken, Brother Grundvig traveled in a wagon the remainder of the journey to Salt Lake. For 2 years his wound tortured him. When he had been struck in the hip, he had, as he thought, removed the arrow. Later, a physician, probing the wound, discovered a part of the arrow still embedded. When it was extracted, his health returned to him. But what of Jacine, the wife and mother? No word ever explained the mystery of that wilderness. Inquiry reached where all without result. Inquiry, research were all without result. Only one ray of comfort has come to him. After a few years, he decided to marry again. He went with his bride to the endowment house in Salt Lake City. At the time, he asked if he could be sealed to Jacine, and the clerk asked him if she were dead. He could not tell, so related the story of her abduction. The clerk went into an adjoining room and spoke to President Daniel H. Wells, who followed him back to the doorway. He looked steadily at Brother Grundtvig, who returned his gaze. Then President Wells said slowly, "Your wife is dead." That's an interesting story for a few reasons. Like, what's funny is that this is the lived experience. I know it seems like, oh, these are trite or these are tropes of what Indians were like back then, but there's a reason that these stories endure in just our regular vernacular. This is the stuff that happened. But what I actually find most interesting is Brother Grundtvig and going to get sealed. How it ends on the note that his wife is dead is either through the understanding and experience of the people around him, or they were probably asking the Lord what was going on. And I'm actually very grateful to the idea that Brother Grundtvig was actually very cognizant of his wife's abduction and wanting to make sure that she was still sealed to him. I hope that brought great joy and solace to her after her life. That's kind of a somber story, but one that well, let me put it this way. Sorry, I'm trying to mull it over and all the meanings behind it. There's a bunch of subtlety in it that's quite fascinating. For me, I think one of the greatest blessings that we have as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that because we have the knowledge of the sealing power and the quiet faith that comes from knowing that, hey, we're going to see him again in the next life, really there is a whole difference of life that comes from being able to truly say, "Oh, death, where is thy sting?" And I'm not saying it's all rainbows and sunshine whenever family members pass. Not at all. But I'm saying that there's a lot more quiet assurance and calmness around the whole subject of tragedy in one's life when you have the fullness of the restored gospel. All right, A Trapper's Adventure by Claude T. Barnes. I wonder if he's related to Jonah Barnes. The author of this thrilling story and the one following is Claude T. Barnes, a prominent attorney in Salt Lake City and a gifted writer who has written several biographies and many articles dealing with bird and animal life in the West. So, something tells me this is maybe a little embellished, since it's not saying it's a true story, a journal, or other such things. All right. In a delightful balsam-embowered glade of the Wasatch Mountains, there once lived a trapper by the name of Turwill, a rugged, kindly-mannered man, who, despite his 60 years and medium build, possessed such physical strength and endurance that his powers in the respect were commented upon generally among those who knew him. A feat he readily accomplished with a quiet pride in the fact that no one else could do it, consisted in stretching himself flat on the floor, on his stomach, with his arms extended to their limit ahead, and then with his 50-pound sack of flour on his back, actually raising his body 8 inches or more on his fingers and toes. This astonishing strength had resulted from years of the most arduous exercise over the steep hills and in the dense forest that constituted his home. Wow. Okay, let's get 50-pound sacks, stick it on someone's back, and have them do push-ups with fingers and toes. It was a mild and invigorating morning in November when Turwill slung his traps over his shoulders and meandered through the gloomy balsam to a willow-fringed brook, which had long been noted for its many beaver dams. Some of the deciduous trees he passed were stripped, others still covered with gorgeous autumnal foliage. Save for the occasional cheeping of newly arrived winter visitors, the birds were silent, and there was scarcely a sign of wildlife among the oak copses of the lower hillsides. Here and there late flowers beautified the woodland pathway, but even more pleasing than these to Turwill's mind was the rustle of the carpet of crisp leaves underfoot. Turwill carried a single shot of .22 caliber, this weapon being light and yet of sufficient power to dispatch any animal that his traps could hold. Moreover, Turwill's fearless, coupled with the increasing shyness of all the large wild animals, combined to make his sense of security so complete that he seldom gave a thought to the possibility of danger. Any man who, with a single-barreled shotgun, has deliberately stalked a grizzly, met on its onrush at the distance of a few feet and almost blown its head off with birdshot, is not inclined to thereafter notice the dangers that would intimidate the ordinary woodsman. And far back in the 70s, Turwill had, to the wonder of an entire encampment, accomplished just such an exploit. So, with a single-barreled shotgun, stalked a grizzly, met the onrush a few feet away, and took it out with birdshot. Whew! So, I'm a fan of kind of the Western genre a little bit. I'm not like a devoted person to the Western, but I do like the second Red Dead Redemption game. And there are certain things that game teaches you. And one of them is whenever you hear the growling of a grizzly bear, that you better run or better have some really big gun to shoot. So, and I know it's just a game, but I would, I can understand why he isn't very fearful after that. If he can do that, take it out with a birdshot charge, dang. It also makes me wonder, was the birdshot that he had back then had stronger powder than what they do now? Minks, otters, beavers, martens, kit foxes, red foxes, coyotes, skunks, muskrats, and wildcats occupied most of Turwill's time, and were his chief means of subsistence, his cabin each spring being almost covered with the drying pelts of these creatures. One year he trapped a black fox, which, being merely a color phase of the red fox, sometimes appears in the Wasatch, and the $1,000 he received for this rarity had meant independence for several seasons. He meandered the creek this particular morning. He carefully set his traps at several beaver dams, always in such a manner that when the victim should be caught, its struggles would unfasten a weight which would pull it into the water and drown it. For, be it observed in passing, a trapped beaver is liable to gnaw its own leg off unless prevented by some foresight of the woodsman. He twisted through labyrinthine growths for mink trails beside the murmuring water, giving but a furtive parting glance at each side to lead him thither on his next visitation. Finally, all his traps being set, he clambered up through the groves of solemn pines, bethinking himself that he would make a detour down the canyon slopes, and thus, perchance, happen upon some late service berries, or at least some diversion of interest to his lonely life. 2 days prior to this he had come upon a dead white-tailed buck, mauled into a grove of quaking aspens, and so battered, hooked, and torn that Turwill's quick eyes at once detected the result of a gruesome battle between two forest rivals, the victor of whom had not left his victim until every sign of life had ebbed away. This, too, was the rutting season of the larger mule deer, and he expected almost any time to hear the crashing of horns, the stamping of feet, and other sounds that invariably accompanied conflicts between the maddened bucks. Oh, that's interesting. Bucks played for keeps back in the day. I wonder how often they do that now. As he walked, the only wild things that appeared were a gray ruffled grouse, a golden eagle wheeling the blue above, a Clark nutcracker, and a few juncos. As he emerged, however, upon a glade of grassy loveliness, a slight movement on the other side at once halted him. In an instant, he discerned the object to be a mule deer buck, almost hidden by a handsome blue spruce. Hot with the fire of recent battles, the animal stared at him, as if half expecting an encounter with a new rival. This instant of hesitation, however, proved its undoing, for as it turned to flee, Turwill fired, and to his surprise it dropped as if a stone, and laid perfectly still. With a smile of satisfaction, Turwill crossed the green and approached his prize. He casually leaned his gun upon a handy bough, and was just in the act of lifting the buck's head by its antlers, when to his consternation the animal instantly sprang to its feet, and with rage in its eyes was upon him, determined to gore him with its battle-tried tines. Like a flash, the situation dawned upon Turwill. The headshot had merely stunned the deer, and now, for his own overconfidence, a horrid death was perilously imminent. Here again the alert woodcraft of the old hunter manifested itself. For the second Turwill felt the animal rise, his quick perception told him not to release his hold of the horns. The effort was nevertheless a trying one, for as the buck whirled, the muscles of Turwill's right arm rose in great knots, and the cords pressed the skin as if so many wires. Round and round the agonized beast tore, dragging Turwill in a frenzied effort to release its head, and jerking his 170 pounds of weight over young quaking aspens as if it were a stack of shavings. After a moment or so of this fierce rearing, twisting, and turning, the disconcerted buck stopped, protruded its tongue, and breathed heavily. With the slightest movement, however, on the part of Turwill, who could think of no possible escape save by the use of his heavy pocket-knife, unfortunately closed and in his pocket, the infuriated deer turned, this time not away from him, but toward the trapper at its side. Aghast at his peril, Turwill grasped the other beam with his left hand, his alacrity barely saving him from the vicious thrust of sharp antlers. There the combatants tussled, Turwill at the buck's right side, holding his right antler firmly with his right hand, and with his left, but unfortunate man soon realized that he could not long thus protect himself. With new position, his wiry antagonist dragged him about at will. The furious buck, however, constantly endeavored to turn for fatal jab, and Turwill several times had his chin nearly impaled on tipped points. Just at this instant, when Turwill felt his strength waning, it dawned on him that his only hope lay in twisting his victim's neck after the manner of the cowboys. Perspiration dripped into his eyes, and he could hardly see under the terrible strain. Yet he pulled with his left arm and pushed with his right, with that fighting expression the boys had always noted in his face when he was bending spikes with his bare hands. Slowly the buck's neck twisted, and the animal's tongue stuck out further, and its breathing became jerky and labored. Turwill applied every atom of strength, and then at last he realized that either the neck must break or his victim fall. Little by little the buck gave way to the pain, then suddenly began to fall directly upon its relentless enemy. Anticipating this movement, Turwill sprang to the front with the quickness of a cat, never for an instant releasing his hold, but on the contrary maintaining the twist as the deer fell. With a spring he pressed the buck's muzzle with his knee, forcing his head against its shoulder. And then, while holding with his left hand, he reached quickly into his pocket. With his right hand, withdrew his pocket-knife. While the animal struggled, he held the knife with his teeth as he opened the blade. Then, with a few quick slashes over the tensely drawn neck of his victim, he severed its jugular vein. He watched the fire slowly dim in the valiant buck's eyes, and then, as their accustomed mildness came over them, this strong man of the woods himself could hardly withhold a tear, for no one with a heart can see the dying eyes of a deer without being touched thereby. When the animal's strength had waned so that Turwill could release his hold, he cut the other vein, and soon thereafter saw the poor thing's suffering cease. Turwill, now that all danger was past, sank back exhausted on the grass, for there were some minutes he lay as helpless as a babe. After a time he rose, eviscerated the buck, fastened its severed head to his shoulders, and picking up his gun, trudged down the canyon. Now, as he sits alone in his cabin, when the night winds send the snow moaning through the pines, he occasionally looks at that mounted head, the soft eyes which truly recall the mild light of the live ones, and pledges himself never again to take the life of a deer, except when driven thereto by the pangs of hunger. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Just a primal struggle between man and nature. That's also another one that's I find fascinating for there. Sorry, another book that I've read is it sounds funny, but it was suggested to me by my brother, and he put it in such a way that I was like, okay, I've got to see what this is about. He says, when you read this book, it changes your DNA. It's that good. I was like, what? Why would it do that? I mean, of all things. And he wasn't wrong. The book is called On Killing. It is a combat veteran's guide to understanding how you train people to be able to take a life. So there's On Killing, and then I think there's another one on combat. I haven't read the one on combat, but On Killing, he goes through and describes what is necessary for a soldier to go out and take a life. You think this is a very macabre subject, but the fact is the reason why it changes your DNA is if all you read it for is to understand what the subject is about and how it actually operates, you're missing out. Really, if you truly look at it, it's a book about psychology of the human at the most basic instinct level, the part at which 80 to 90% of our time is spent. We actually focus on very specific tasks and things at the time that we are taking to them. So most of what we act upon is just reaction. And this book talks about how that operates naturally and how to use that and how to train people to eventually go on to be able to take a life if necessary. But the purpose is not so much being able to do that. It teaches about humanity in general. And that's what changes your DNA. It helps you understand, why do people what they do what they do when they're in groups? Why is it that people are reluctant to do this or to do that? One of the best things that it highlights, both at the beginning and the end, is that generally human beings don't like taking the life of other things, whether it be people or animals. And one of the hardest things to do is to take the life of anything up close and personal. And I agree. I mean, I take care of my own flock of chickens, and there are times when they've outgrown their usefulness, and you don't want them to just grow old and sick and have a lingering death. And moreover, you can use the meat, so you have to dispatch the chickens. And they're very different from anything that's than regular. They're a bird. They're not a mammal, so there's a huge difference that way. Plus, there's a lot that goes into processing a chicken that most people don't care to know about, and that's fine. But at the same time, it's like, when you got to do it, you do it. And so when you learn to actually dispatch animals for farm use, there's a lot that is interesting to learn about it, both psychologically and physically, like the actual act of going through and harvesting everything that you can so you can actually have a meal. People are so removed, and I think it's definitely not for everybody. I'm not going to suggest it. At the same time, I sit here and think about how much it's made me appreciate a lot more the work that my ancestors had to do, the work that other people have had to do, and really just have a tiny bit of understanding in stories like this, where, you know, he didn't want that to happen, but at the same time, he knew that if he did not have to kill, if he did not kill the deer, he was going to be killed. There's just times where that is the case. And And it's understandable that, they didn't want to kill a deer after that. I don't blame them. You don't go through a struggle with another living thing that you feel quite equal with and not have it impact you. A Prospector's Adventure by Claude T. Barnes. Is this the same Claude T. Barnes? I think it is. Yeah, it is. Okay. So we got his writing style. In a picturesque and rugged part of the Wasatch Mountains, wait, did he start the same story again that same way? Let's see here. In a delightful, balsam-endowed glade of the Wasatch Mountains. Oh, okay. Slightly different. Same location, though, Wasatch Mountains. In a picturesque and rugged part of the Wasatch Mountains, there once lived a prospector by the name of Parker, a kindly-mannered man of about 60 years of age, healthy, resourceful, and wiry. His solitary log cabin was nestled beside a spring in the midst of a grove of majestic balsam, and summer and winter he had no companions save a few friendly blue jays, magpies, and small mammals. Parker had found several fortunes for other men, for it was his habit, when he made a discovery of exceptional merit, to sell his interest at once, and then set out again into the wilds. He loved the clear air of the mountains, and the inspiring grandeur of the snow-capped peaks, for though encouraged always by the thought of gold, he was at heart sincerely reverent, finding in the mystical beauty and power of nature the nearest communion with the infinite power. And at the time of which we speak, Parker searched each day through the labyrinthine tunnels, slopes, and levels of a once famous, though now deserted mine, his belief being that by some chance he would uncover a rich, undetected vein of ore. The mine, or mine entrance, was at the foot of a windswept escarpment, over a mile by devious trails from the snug habitation of the old miner. It was a cold, bright morning in February when Parker closed the cabin door behind him and trudged through the crisp, deep snow up the canyon slopes toward the tunnel. A snowy owl skimmed silently from a pine tree whence he had frightened it. Hundreds of juncos flushed before him and alighted further down, and a lonely coyote jarbled its weird howl from a distant ridge. Once he stopped beside a handsome young balsam and ate some of the gummy blisters, the acrid substance being to his mind a tonic and a regulator of rare value. The wind had swept all of the snow from the entrance to the tunnel, proving that grim winter had come to its most ruthless period of destruction. Lighting his head-lantern and picking up dynamite and tools, he walked into the tunnel. A slight noise before him for a second attracted his attention, but attributing it to either a pebble falling from the tunnel wall or the scurry of a wood rat, he gave the matter little thought and walked further into the gloom. The mine was a maze of cross-cut, like catacombs on the Via Appia. Indeed, one might walk for an hour through the complicated slopes, tunnels, and side tunnels without traversing them all. Unprotected shafts, rotted ladders, and loosely hanging boulders, moreover, made this maze dangerous to all except the most expert miner. Dude, in February when it snows a lot and that water is creeping through the rock, if I heard a pebble coming off the wall, that'd be pretty dangerous. As Parker neared the first side tunnel, he again heard a slight rushing sound, and, though courageous far beyond the average, he sensed a slight tremor at the thought that perhaps some new danger lurked ahead. Yet had he not 100 times searched through the dismal old mine without greater misfortune than occasionally becoming lost? He hesitated but a moment, and then continued to grope his way through the various passages. Finally, he stopped to examine a side wall at a point that appeared to cover a vein. He picked at it for a time with his pick, and then, taking up his hammer and drill, proceeded to make a hole for the powder. It was not long before the shot was properly tamped and the cap placed. So, lighting the fuse, he stepped briskly back into another passage. The fuse sputtered, then a terrific explosion rent the wall, the sound reverberating and grumbling through the intricate tunnels and shafts as an echo in the Hycrian wood. This, to Parker, was usual, commonplace, but as the sounds subsided, a piercing scream, like that of a wild woman, issued from a neighboring tunnel, and held him frozen with horror. Never in all his experience as a miner had he ever heard anything so uncanny and dreadful. His hair seemed creeping from his scalp. Cold drops of sweat beaded down his forehead, and in utter consternation he leaned weakly against the side of a tunnel. Nothing is so weird and alarming as the indiscernible peril. This intrepid man of the woods, accustomed to meeting bears and passing them with mutual deference and respect, was at a complete loss to cope with the supernatural. For a time he waited agape, as if expecting another scream, for no one would have mistaken the sound for the cry of a human in distress. It was more powerful and doleful. It had about it an inexplicable mingling of distress and loneliness, power and yet fear, and there was no repetition. Parker gradually summoned up his courage and with pick in hand resolutely but slowly approached the tunnel from which the scream had come. His headlight created 1,000 furtive timber shadows which led to disquieting imaginations, but when at last he gazed into the portentous tunnel, nothing but somber dripping stone met his eyes. Too unstrung to think of giving up the mystery, which, unless solved, would forever haunt his work, he gradually searched other passages to no avail. At last he thought that he would shout in the hope of human reply, but his voice stuck in his throat, as if unwilling to disclose his presence to the hobgoblin near. Yet some sound must have escaped him, for instantly the tunnels were again pierced by another appalling screech. Nevertheless, it had a slightly different intonation at the end that actually seemed to inspire him with renewed boldness. He advanced more quickly now, but with his body drawn into more alert attitude of defense, as if convinced that the encounter, when it took place, would at least be with flesh and blood. The scream was again repeated, and then, as Parker quickly sneaked upon the sound, 2 glowing balls like discs of phosphorus suddenly appeared beside a distant timber. Here, at last, was the Gorgon itself, though presumably without loathsome snakes for hair. For a full minute he steadily met the animal's gaze, awaiting some sign of belligerency. Nothing happened save the uninterrupted glowing of the 2 apprehensive eyes. It suddenly dawned upon Parker, however, that the animal stood in the very spot over which he must go to make his exit from the group of tunnels in which he had been drilling. This thought gave him some concern, but realizing that a sign of timidity before a wild animal is a quickly appreciated invitation to attack, he groped about for a stone, and then threw it boldly and fiercely at the glowing eyes. Again the scream shot along the tunnel walls, but the eyes disappeared whither Parker could not discern. He approached and found the passage clear. Now, a personal encounter with a wild animal in a dark mine was not advisable for a man armed only with a miner's pick, and moreover Parker now knew full well that he himself had unwittingly driven the sulking animal into the mine against its will, and that it was lost. With the idea of passing out of the mine and procuring a gun before the disconcerting animal should find the exit, he quickly walked along the tunnels well known to him, and in 10 or 15 minutes emerged from the mine. He had not gone over 4 or 5 rods from the mouth of the tunnel when some telepathic influence caused him to turn his head back. To his surprise, a fine, big mountain lion was in the act of leaving the tunnel. He shouted as if to stop it, but it bounded lithely and quickly up the hill and away. The distracted animal, from sheer desperation, had actually followed closely at his heels in the hope of escaping from the even more terrifying mine. It is strange how animals, when thus at the end of their wits, will turn to man, their deadliest foe, for refuge, and it is akin to the act of the doe rushing the hunter to escape his relentless hounds. Here I was thinking it may have been the screech owl, but a mountain lion? Wow. I did not see that coming, and also I could see it. If you've ever heard mountain lion screams, not the kind that are the, stock sound it's not footage, but the stock sounds that you get on the internet of, no, I'm talking about like true human sounds. It's a true animal sounds, not the canned human ones that are perfect for, whatever video you're making. It's amazing how much they have very different sounds. So a cat screaming like that, yeah, especially a big cat, That would be unnerving. That would be like, so, well, glad he could help the cougar out of the mine. Yikes. That's pretty nuts. To me, I'm sitting here wondering, is it going to be a banshee? Is it going to be what's it going to be? But nope, just a good old cougar. Yikes. Next will be the story of old Bruno, but we'll save that for another day. So this one has a lot more to do with animals and other things like that, but all of these are really kind of cool. I think after this, I may have a Nibley book or otherwise, because I think people are hungry for doctrine and other things, but I think it's good to break up heavy church doctrine with these stories. And the reason why is half of the reason that we love the scriptures is the stories that they tell. The doctrine is extremely important, absolutely. I will never diminish that. Yet at the same time, we remember the stories of what is occurring more easily and readily because we can relate to it. And in the same way, this harkens back to a time which we hardly have a glimpse of anywhere. And so it's good to be reminded of these times. And hopefully we never have to worry about fending off cougars or doing these hard and heavy things. But should the need arise, I hope through stories and understanding of ourselves and the world around us, we are not caught off guard. And most importantly, I hope it reminds us not only of the beauty of God's world, but how much he loves all of us. And with that, may God's Spirit be with you.